Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is presented by Predict, and we will cover testing job applicants remotely. My name is Oscar Rios, and I am the current PTCNC president, and I will introduce today's presenters. Today's presenters are Clinton Kelly and Brian Morich. Just a little bit about themselves before we begin. Clinton holds a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from California State University, Sacramento, and a doctorate in applied social psychology from Birmingham Young University. He specializes in test development and validation for personnel selection and licensure certification. He has more than 12 years of experience conducting job analyses, developing and validating examinations for both private and public sector organizations. His experience has included the design and administration of content validation studies, including job analyses, criterion-related validation studies, test content development for written tests, performance tests, interviews, and non-cognitive assessments, written technical reports, performing specialized research related to test construction and validation. He has provided technical guidance to clients in test design, use, and analysis, as well as conducted psychometric analyses to assess exam and item fairness and functioning. Clinton is also a lecturer at California State University, Sacramento, and teaches undergraduate courses in industrial organizational psychology. Mr. Morich, the other presenter, is a principal consultant with Predict and has over 35 years of experience in the fields of test development and validation and data analysis. Over the course of his career, Mr. Morich has developed written tests, oral interview examinations, assessment centers, physical ability tests, job performance test, audio-video test, aptitude test, licensure and certification examinations, interest inventories, employee attitude surveys, situational judgment tests, and biodata instruments. His area of expertise include multi-jurisdictional job analyses, multiple choice item writing, test validation procedures, examination pass point setting procedures, and interpreting classical statistical data. Mr. Morich is a psychometrician of the National Association of State Contractor Licensure Agencies, where he oversees the development and maintenance of national contractor licensure examinations. Prior to rejoining Predict, Mr. Morich was the licensure test development manager for PSI, a national test development company. As manager, Mr. Morich oversaw the development and maintenance of over 1,800 state and national licensure exams with clients in 37 states and Mr. Morich's employment history also includes senior test development consultant for CPS Human Resources Services, where he was responsible for test development for their test rental program. Senior research analyst for the U.S. Department of Labor, where he was involved in the development of the U.S. Employment Services General Aptitude Test Battery and was a member of the original project team that developed the U.S. Department of Labor's ONET database, and senior personnel analyst for the San Francisco Police and Fire Departments, where his primary responsibility was the development of entry-level and promotional examinations under the constraints of the Federal Consent Decree. Mr. Morich obtained his Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology from the University of California at Berkeley. He obtained his Master's of Arts degree in educational psychology from San Francisco State University, where his studies focused primarily on the development and validation of cognitive examinations and behavioral statistics. Mr. Morich is a past president and board member of the Personnel Testing Council of Northern California. Just a quick reminder, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. There's a chat feature that's been enabled, and you may ask questions. You may ask your questions there, and we will address them. And we'll address as many questions as possible as time permits at the end of the presentation. And I'll hand it over now to the presenters. Thank you.
Clinton,
thank you.
Clinton, I'm told that the PowerPoint needs to be in the presentation mode. So if you can
okay.
Please. Thank you.
Does that work? Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. We're happy to be here and happy to speak with you about testing applicants remotely. So to get started, I'll let Brian give an overview of kind of what we're going to cover today. So Brian, if you want to go ahead and provide that overview.
Yeah, basically we're going to talk about online testing versus internet access. Basically what the type of things you need. We're going to look at unproctored internet testing versus remotely proctored testing. Clinton's going to present some research on unproctored testing, and then we're going to look into logistical and security issues, exam type and item types that are best worked with the unproctored testing, and at the end we're going to show you some recent results from some high stakes testing that we did unproctored.
All right, so jumping into it first, we'll take a quick look at just online testing and diversity. Now, sometimes you hear people talk about what we call the digital divide, like the different differences in access to resources or to internet. And I'm going to present a little bit of research on that here. This was back in 2004, so that's a long time ago. That's ancient history in kind of internet days or kind of technology. They looked at, there's a research, they looked at internet samples and compared them to all of the research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology for that year. And they found that internet samples were actually more diverse and more representative of the US population than all of the studies that were published using conventional samples in that journal. So in that case, internet samples actually better represented the US population. Another study, again, they found that internet samples were reasonably representative in terms of race and social class at all the US state levels. This was a national study. So this wasn't necessarily testing, it was just collecting data using samples from the internet. And some more, and again, this is 2010, this was 10 years ago. At this point, they said, hey, the original digital divide of physical internet access, it's really kind of changed, not so much of a divide between who has access to internet versus who doesn't. It's more of a divide between those who know how to use the internet and versus those who don't. So more of a differences in skills in using the internet. And we can actually see that in some research by Pew Research. They looked at who uses the internet. And here it's broken down by the three ethnicities that they provided, white, black, and Hispanic. And in 2019, across all of them, we combine all, over 90% of the US adults say they currently use the internet. And when you break it down from the ethnicity there, it goes from a high of 92 to a low of 85%. So again, even by ethnicity, the vast majority of US Americans are using the internet. The same research by Pew here, when you look at, when they break it down by income, again, the lowest percentage there is at 82% and a high being 98%. So again, the vast majority of Americans are using the internet across income levels. You do see, a little lower from that less than 30,000, but again, that's still at 82% of individuals. And then further, when you break it down by age, who's using the internet? You can see that actually when it comes to the 18 to 29-year-olds, that's 100%. And 30 to 49, it's at 98%, 97%. And again, the lowest group there is at 73% with older than 65. And so if we were to look at those you're hiring, the majority of individuals that you're hiring are probably in that 18, say 50 range. That's about 98% of people in the US say they use the internet. And especially if we're looking at entry-level hiring, where most of the testing is occurring, your applicant population probably tends to be even younger than that. You're looking at close to 100% of the people saying they use the internet. Now, there are some differences in kind of devices that are using, but we're not going to get into that today. But just overall, want to show that people have access and use the internet. That digital divide is not so much of an issue in today's age. Now, before we move on to unproctored testing, just recently want to address the difference between remotely proctored tests and versus unproctored tests. Our focus is going to be on unproctored testing, but remotely proctored tests, they come in a variety of options, but that is anytime a candidate is monitored remotely, and it is typically via a webcam. So all of the options out there, are the majority, I would say, do monitor the candidate through a webcam. And there's a few options. One's called the record and review method, and that's where the candidate is recorded via the webcam, but they may not have a person watching them in that time. but you can review the video at a later point in time to see if there's any evidence of cheating behavior that's occurred during the test, while the candidate was taking the test. Fairly recent now is most of the services offer some sort of automated or using artificial intelligence remote proctoring, and it's essentially a new take on the record and review model, where the candidate again is recorded via webcam, but they use artificial intelligence to look for additional people in the background, noise, the eye movement of the candidates, where they're looking, and their system will automatically flag instances of behavior that appears to be suspicious. And then you, as the purchaser of their system, can then review the video and look at those flags and determine if the candidate was cheating or not. So it's kind of a new take on the record and review model. And then lastly, they have live person real-time monitoring, and that is when a person is on the other side of the webcam and is watching the person take the test, can interact with them, can tell them to stop engaging in certain behaviors, can stop their test. And that is the live real-time person monitoring. So those are all remotely proctored options. We're not really going to cover that today, just to kind of say, so when we're talking about unproctored testing, we are not talking about this. We consider these to be remotely proctored tests. If you're going to go with a remotely proctored option, it can get pricey depending on what you're looking to do. So if you're looking at any of the record and review or artificial intelligence models, the vendors out there, that's typically going to cost you about $7 to $12 a test, in addition to whatever you're paying for the test itself. So if you're paying your testing vendor, let's just make up a number, $20 for a test, you're going to pay an additional, say maybe $12 for that remote proctoring service. If you want the live person real-time monitoring, and say it's a 2-hour test, that's going to be upwards around $30 a candidate in addition to your testing costs. So if you have large candidate counts, remote proctoring can, in many cases, not be economically feasible depending on your situation. The record and review is not so bad, but the live person proctoring can get pricey. If you are going to do remote proctoring, though, you can rest assured that from the little research that's out there, this shows that the test scores tend to be very similar across in-person proctored tests and remotely proctored tests. In this in this study, they found that they looked at 3 licensing exams and found that the average scores, the standard deviations, the internal consistencies, the reliabilities, they were all essentially identical across in-person proctored tests and remotely proctored tests. And these were tests that were proctored at an online kiosk. And you can see across the means across these 3 tests, they were all very, very much similar. So if you are going to go with remotely proctored tests, the little bit of research that is out there does tend to indicate that your test scores will be similar in on-site proctored and remotely proctored. But now let's take a look at unproctored testing. So now we're going to move to what really is the focus of the current presentation. And there has been some resistance because we know the majority of people, and probably in this webinar today, are in the public sector. There has been resistance to what we call UIT, unproctored internet testing. That's the term that you often see in the literature. Has been resistance to UIT in the public sector. In this study in 2018, they actually just were asking people's opinions on why they don't do or do not use unproctored testing. And compared to the private sector, public sector was much more leery and unwilling to use UIT unproctored testing. In the private sector, it's been used for quite some time now, but public sector, they're much more likely to view it as not worth their investment, not being widely used, and inviting cheating. And they kind of cited test type and security issues, basically those 3 reasons as kind of that are weighing most heavily in their decision to use or to not use UIT. And I thought it was interesting here that Nesbal and Highhouse here at the end, they say, hey, testing consultants, we probably need to do a better job to effectively communicate what are the costs and the benefits, so both of UIT to the public sector, to maybe provide a better case for the viability of unproctored testing. And that's what we're going to try to do here, is kind of show, hey, what does the data show? Can we make the case for unproctored testing? Does it make sense? And hopefully we'll be able to do that today. So now making the case for unproctored testing, here's some research done in 2009 where they use both a cognitive ability test and a personality test in both an unproctored and then followed it up with a proctored setting. So they had people take the personality test and a cognitive ability test in an unproctored setting, and then later said, hey, come back and took those same tests in a proctored setting. They found no discernible effect on test scores across the conditions, across proctored and unproctored settings. And that makes sense for personality. Personality has typically been viewed as more acceptable in an unproctored setting. And the reason for that is if you think about the personality items, let's say I enjoy, say you have a personality item that says, I enjoy learning new things. And you rate that from strongly disagree to strongly agree. If you're in a proctored test center and someone's looking over your shoulder while you answer that question, if I hate doing new things, I can easily misrepresent myself and check. I love doing new things with someone over my shoulder versus if I'm at home taking that test. So your ability to kind of misrepresent yourself or to attempt to cheat or impression manage does not really, it's not really easier or harder if you're in a proctored or unproctored setting with personality tests. Now the same is not true with cognitive ability tests. If you have a math question of what is 4 plus 4 and you're in a proctored setting, you can't really Google it or look it up or try to find the answer. Whereas if you're at home, there's that potential exists for you to cheat where it is much easier. But regardless of that, in this case, they saw there was no test score difference really between conditions. And what they saw is actually they saw that proctored test scores of cognitive ability, this graph here on the left is the results from the cognitive ability test, that test scores were actually slightly higher in the proctored condition than in the unproctored condition. And they attributed this to a practice effect. And we see this regularly in testing where you give candidates a similar test or the same test close together. They learn and pick up things from the test. And so about 49% of the people, their scores were slightly higher because of this practice effect. 42, almost 43%, their scores were identical. And 7.7%, so just a little over 7% of individuals, there was evidence of cheating. And in this case, what they mean by evidence of cheating, it doesn't mean that they were flagged as, hey, they cheated and we know they cheated. It was just that their scores were statistically, they were significantly lower in the proctored setting than in the unproctored setting. So they're flagged as potential evidence of cheating because their scores were lower in the proctored setting than in the unproctored setting. So overall, in this study, they show, hey, there's not a lot of change in average test scores by proctored and unproctored. Levens and Burke in 2011, similarly, they did cognitive ability testing for 4 different job levels, followed it up with proctored testing, and on average, they found a similar effect. On average, test scores were slightly higher in the proctored environment. So it's the opposite of what you would expect, you know, if there's cheating going on. And what you can see here is this circled area that says negative 1.96 standard deviations. So these would be the people that could potentially be flagged as cheaters. These are people that have significantly lower scores in the proctored setting compared to the unproctored setting. And you can see here across all these different jobs, the managerial, graduate, supervisory, it ranges from a high of 2.2% of scores to a low of 0.3% of scores. So in general, we're not seeing this study again. They did not see a lot of cheating going on. Most of the scores in this middle section here were statistically identical. Again, this was high stakes. This was for people applying for jobs. This was in Europe, but these were people applying for jobs in 4 different job families. So they had an incentive to cheat here. Now, a study by Landers and Sackett in 2012, they did not use actual job applicants here, but they kind of said, hey, what would be the effects of cheating? They wanted to simulate how much will cheating affect how well a test is able to predict who's going to be a good employee. And so they said, well, let's take a look to see, well, if 5% of people cheat, 20%, 30%, and looked at if different percentage of people cheat versus, you know, how will that affect the validity of the test? And one of the balancing acts that there is supposedly one of the benefits of unproctored testing is you can get more applicants. You can draw a larger applicant pool and get more people to apply for the job. And so they said, if you're increasing your applicant pool, there's actually a mean improvement on the predictive power on the test among those who you end up hiring, even if cheating does occur. So if unproctored testing results in you attracting more and better applicants, even if cheating is going on, you're better as a result of it. Now, they also say, hey, the more and more that people cheat, obviously it's going to have an effect on lowering your criterion scores. But they say if cheating is relatively low, and they state relatively low as being less than 30%, if it's anywhere less than 30, if you double the applicant pool, and if it's at 5% or 7%, like most of the studies, you don't have to double. It's only a handful of applicants you to add to the pool. That adding those applicants to the pool will overcome the effects of cheating in all the combinations they simulated. Now, another one in 2014 here, again, high stakes. They use the computer adaptive deductive reasoning test. So that's a cognitive ability test. They had over 4,000 people in their sample. And similar to previous studies, they found 6.4% of people were flagged as demonstrating cheating behavior. And again, so 6.4% of the sample had lower scores in a proctored environment than in the unproctored environment, indicating that they may have potentially cheated. And so we're not seeing widespread instances. They actually said here, I took this as a quote from their research, it says the base rate of cheating is quite low. And UIT does not seem to exacerbate the extent to which cheating occurs on pre-employment tests. So that's kind of the takeaway they had from their study. Here's another study in 2014 here, is they utilized a speeded ability test, and again found scores were not reflective of widespread cheating. So again, found similar scores. Again, these are high stakes. Again, so we're seeing a similar pattern in this research of where it's high stakes and people are actually applying for jobs where they're not seeing widespread cheating in unproctored settings. One of the key to these studies here, if you see here, they utilize a speeded ability test. Almost all the research in these, it's timing is important here. In the research is you cannot allow candidates to sit on a test for hours upon hours. You have to make sure your time limit is appropriate and that you give people enough time, but not more time than is needed. So timing is one of the key things in these studies, though, is the timing piece. And Brian will touch on that a little later. In 2017, again, another study here. So it's kind of another one. This one was just on the personality. So it used the Big 5 personality test in both an unproctored and proctored scenario. So just kind of measured those Big 5 characteristics there that you see listed. Again, mean differences varied from null to small. So again, not a lot of difference between a proctored and unproctored setting. In this case, specifically just looking at personality traits. And then in a study in 2006, this study is a little interesting. So this was not job applicants. This was done at a university, but they did unproctored testing, and they a random portion of the sample, they told them cheat on the test. And so before they were sent the test link, they actually said, hey, you're part of the cheating group. We want you to try to cheat. Try to do whatever you can to improve your score and cheat on this test. And the rest of the group, or the control group, they were given another message to say you're going to take a test. They were not told to cheat. Of those that they told to cheat, 71% of them, they said, hey, it wasn't easy. It was hard to improve my score. And you can see here, it didn't really have a big effect on the internal consistency, on the reliability of the test. You can see here the control group, the full test had a reliability of 0.78. The cheating group had an overall reliability of 0.83. So again, the internal consistency of the test, it held together in both groups. And they did see some patterns though in the cheating, and we'll talk about this. They saw that for the cheaters, they were most able to improve their scores in vocabulary, numbers, and calculations. And what they saw is those were tests where you could easily look up the answer. So again, if you see the question, what is 4 plus 4? If you don't know that, you can type into Google, what is 4 plus 4? And it'll give you the answer. So they saw that people were able to improve their scores in those sections with items that were easy to look up and find the answers, and that cheating was not able to improve scores on the test sections that were hard to find the answers, like analogies, figures, syllogisms. So if you're thinking you have reading comprehension or math and context, word problems, things like that, those are going to be harder to cheat with. And so you can see here, even within the cheater group, they have what they call, you see the labels here, they have cheating, ineffective and effective. So of the people that they asked to cheat, which is about 180, what is that, 100 and, so 75 of those said, I wasn't good at cheating. They asked them, hey, do you think you did okay? 75 of the cheaters said, cheating didn't help me. And then the 103 of the cheaters said, I think cheating helped me. And so they wanted to break it out. And you can see the people who thought they were effective cheaters, they were only able to improve their scores on those easily lookable, those items that are easily looked up. So if you're going to go with unproctored testing, have item types on there that are not easily looked up. And similar to the previous study, this is the same study, again, continuing with this study, evidence indicates, they said, hey, about 7 to 10% of candidates are going to cheat on a UI test with a lower bound of 3%. So, but they say, organizations, if you expect no more than 10% of candidates will cheat, you're probably right. And their takeaway is they say, hey, UIT is a very powerful tool when used correctly. It may not be the right, it won't be the right solution in all cases, but when used correctly, it can be a very effective tool that you have to make hiring decisions. Lastly, this study from this year, just 2020, they conducted a meta-analysis where they looked at 49 studies. They kind of said, hey, let's find all the studies that have been done in unproctored testing, and let's see what's the commonality here. So they combined these 4 studies, out of over 100,000 people combined these. The research here did include both educational and employment settings. One of the reasons that's important is the research, when I was looking up in the educational settings, I tended to see more cheating effects in educational settings. And I think that's due to a couple reasons. One is I think a lot of the educational tests have test items on there that are more easy to look up. If you think of taking a test in your history class, that's like kind of more facts, looking at facts, and you can probably Google those things. And so I think that might be one reason. And the other reason I think is when it comes to verifying in an employment setting, if you do cheat, you're probably going to then go on to an interview and maybe a probationary period, and you're more probably likely to be found out. So people might fear those consequences of being found out. And if you're taking a final exam in your test at school, you take that, and it's not like your professor then gives you a second one to say, hey, did you really know what you were talking about? So I think that's the reason why we see some of the differences that we see in educational employment settings when it comes to cheating behavior. For those two reasons, it's just my personal guess. But they looked at, and they found that on average, scores were slightly higher in unproctored settings. So they said, hey, it looks like slightly, if you know about effect size, that effect size of 0.20, it's a small to moderate effect size. But what they saw when you break it down with items that could easily be solved in internet search, they were able to increase their score more than with items that were difficult to, if it was an item that was difficult to solve with an internet search, essentially there was no difference in scores on those items. So their takeaway, if correct solutions are not easily identifiable over the internet, mean score differences were approximately 0. So again, the takeaway is, if you're doing unproctored testing, write items and use items that are not easy to Google. All right, so now we've covered kind of the research that's there. Now we're going to move over to just kind of some practical tips for unproctored testing, and we'll let Brian kind of take it from here.
Okay, next slide, 25. Okay, so just go over some logistics that we have found that have been helpful when we're actually doing unproctored testing. First off, you need to clearly communicate with all the applicants and the stakeholders prior to testing about the process and what's going on, especially union management. Make sure that they're on board as well. One thing that we found out is real helpful is sending out an email prior to sending out the test link. Why? Because that way some of them get kicked back. We can actually determine who's not, if we have bad email addresses, try to get all that ironed out beforehand. Provide a clear timeline for taking the test. Okay, we've been usually working with like a 3 to 5 to 7 day window. 5 seems to work really well. Most candidates can get online and take the test within a 5-day window. And we really clear that you specify the equipment required, and you want to make sure everybody has a really good internet connection. Okay, we will specify the browsers. We have worked with 3 different platforms for actually administering unproctored testing. So each one works with a different, well, works best with a different browser. So we kind of tell them, please use this browser because it alleviates problems in the long run. Okay, and we tell them what type of instrument to take it on. Basically, PCs and laptops work best. Cell phones are a no-no. They can't take it on the cell phone. Also, we have found that it can be an issue if we are requiring the candidates to download any type of programs, especially when we do stuff like web blockers. That could be an issue because some people, they're not as internet savvy. Downloading is not one of their issues. If you can keep people from downloading, you're going to minimize some of your headaches. Okay, also, we tell them how much time they're going to get to take the test. Test has to be timed. Okay. Also, and we tell them they're going to be allowed to use during the test. Next slide. Okay, so some of the common issues that we've actually seen is candidates didn't get their emails. Sending out the initial email first helps to find out some of those issues and get that straightened out before the test. We've had candidates where the link to the test site does not work. Usually that's a individual problem, something with their browser or with their actual, maybe they copied it wrong, but we've gotten those issues. Their internet is slow or it's crashed during the sessions. Most of the platforms that we have worked with, they will actually, if it crashes, it will start up when you start it back up where you left off. But it's something that you need some kind of protocol to deal with before you actually do the testing. Another thing we've come across is candidates who are missing the testing window, or they're starting the test too late with not enough time to finish the testing window. We give them like 5 days. We tell them do it sooner than later. Also, we've had candidates who have submitted their test, hit the submit button before they've completed the test, or they never hit the submit button, so they never finished the test. So we have to basically, these are logistical issues. You should have a contingency plan in advance to deal with these issues. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about test security. Okay, so one thing with test security is what we have found is we talk to as part of the test, as they're getting into the test, we have them sign an honesty contract, basically a pledge not to cheat. Does that keep them from cheating? Well, it'll keep some of them. We also inform the candidates that testing irregularities could void their test scores or their job offers. This has a really profound effect on actually keeping people from cheating if they think that they may lose a job because of it. We can also tell candidates that they may be taking similar tests afterwards to verify their skill levels. And this also will have an effect on the cheating. Okay, so time limits. You need to set a time limit. For us, time limits basically figure out how long it's going to take this test. What we've had done in the past is we've had incumbents take the test and say, take it as a candidate would. And then we would add maybe 25% more time. You don't want to give them too much time, too much extra time. What we've found is, especially throughout our careers, especially working with licensure exams, is candidates will take as much time as you give them. So if it takes them, say, 60 minutes to finish a test and you give them 90 minutes, the vast majority of the candidates will take 90 minutes. Okay, all that does is encourages them to look up stuff and do more cheating. So we try to give them about most all the people are going to actually finish the test, but not a lot of extra time when they can go back and start looking stuff up. Also, there are internet browser lockdowns. There's programs that sometimes come with the platform, and you can also have them download those, which basically shuts down their internet while they're taking the test. We have found that to be a little problematic because not everybody is taking the test using the same browsers. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. Okay, so with security issues, some of the security issues that we are encountering, people recording or stealing the test items. This is, we also have candidates sharing the test items with other candidates. And we're looking at probably the biggest one is candidates using unauthorized resources, basically looking up stuff that they shouldn't be looking up. And the last one is proxy testing. That's basically having someone else take the test for you because it's unproctored, that anybody can take the test for you. Okay, next slide. So with the proctored test, we're looking at confirmatory testing. We had said earlier in the honesty agreement that we may have you take an extra test to confirm your test results. Now, when we're doing unproctored tests, basically, one of the things we want to look at is, are you actually ranking the candidates on these by using the scores from these tests? We highly recommend that you probably don't. Why? Because we can't tell if the scores are basically inflated on the upper level by people cheating, okay? We actually would recommend using it as basically a pass, not pass. Why? The people on the lower end that did not do well, we're pretty sure that they didn't cheat, or else they would have probably done better on the test. Okay, so what we recommend the unproctored test is as a hurdle, basically a pass, not pass hurdle. So that you can, if you have a large candidate pool, you can take maybe your bottom third of the pool and just cut them out completely and have the rest of the candidates go, but don't rank them on the test scores, okay? So, will you attempt to confirm the unproctored score? What happens if you give them another test and they do significantly worse than the first test? Okay, do you call them on it like they were cheating? We usually recommend no. You would rank them on their proctored test score, not on their unproctored test score. Many ways there are many different other tests we can be giving them. We can give them a similar test and then use that to rank candidates, or we can be doing interview questions or work sample. The bottom line is we don't recommend ranking candidates on unproctored testing. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about some different exam and item types. The entry-level versus promotional exams. We highly recommend entry-level exams to be unproctored and not promotional exams. The thing with promotional exams is they have a tendency to be a lot more job knowledge in them. Job knowledge is things that we can be looking up. Therefore, it makes it much more easy to cheat. Also, so entry level, we're usually not presenting them with any specific job knowledge, so it's much harder to cheat. Also, take this one step further. There are certain types of classifications we don't recommend be unproctored. Primarily the police and fire. And the reasons for that is they're highly litigious, and If you have irregularities in your testing process where people might allege that other people cheated, you may have issues with people, suing the exam. Also, if you're using someone else's test items, it's really a good idea to determine where those test items have been. With something like clerical, most of the clerical people are applying for the clerical exams, they're usually local. Police and fire are not. They travel the state. They travel up and down the West Coast, taking different exams, trying to get onto a particular agency. And because of that, there's a much, much, much bigger chance that there's going to be cheating involved and that your test is going to get compromised from the first get-go. So if you are using someone else's police or fire exams, you want to ask them the question of, where has this exam been recently? Okay. Personality tests are probably the most unproctored tests because they're basically, you don't really cheat on them. We call it faking. But personality tests have a tendency to lend themselves. People can fake just as well on a proctored as an unproctored test. So it lends itself to being unproctored. Other low cognitive load tests are really good at being unproctored, such as situational judgment tests or biodata tests. Okay, when we talk about job knowledge tests, we have a tendency to try to avoid items, like Clinton had said, that are we can Google or look up. So vocabulary questions, definitional questions, job knowledge questions, stuff you can look up easily. We have a tendency to avoid them. With stuff like with the math questions, you can easily use a calculator, and we usually recommend that they use a calculator. However, they're pretty easy. They don't differentiate between the candidates all that well. So what we encourage them is using word problems, because then a part of the problem becomes actually setting up the problem and then doing the calculation. It adds that one more step that makes the items much more better. So we're looking at, typically that type of items we like to put in the unproctored are stuff where we present them with all the information, and they have to then use that information to figure out the test questions. There's stuff like reading comprehension questions and analytical ability, where we might present them with, say, a chart or a graph or a table full of numbers and ask them questions about that. Just keep in mind that when we're doing that, you have to keep your what we call real estate issues. You don't want them to be super big. So no more than your reading comp passages. Don't make them more than a page long, or half a page long, I'm sorry. Half a page usually fits well in the browser. Anyway, next slide. And one thing you also want to think about is your unproctored item bank. We highly recommend that you keep your proctored items and your unproctored items in separate banks, and that you do not mingle them. One thing that you should be doing is looking for item creep. Basically, your p-values. Are more people getting the item correct over time? That may be an indication that these items have been compromised or they've been overused. So looking at item creep is something that we highly recommend that you do. If you're giving a test multiple times in a year, we would recommend you also use alternate forms. So I would not recommend giving the same test for a jurisdiction more than once a year. Items do have a shelf life. They periodically get old, they get out there. Recommend that after a certain amount of time, they become exposed too much, you put them on what we call on hold status. Maybe take them out of exams, 3 years, what have you, and basically then reintroduce them. By then, the candidate pool has moved on, and you can typically use them again. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to show you 4 different frequency distributions of the 4 most recent exams that we gave Unproctored. Now, I'm not cherry picking. I'm not picking the 4 best. I'm picking the last 4 that we did. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, slide 33, this is a test for eligibility worker. You see we had 318 candidates take this test. Okay, I'm going to explain this to you. The red, basically the scores in red, those are the number of people that were scored 70% or below. Green is 70 and above. Okay, the reason I did that is because a lot of your agencies out there have a preset 70% pass point. I'm not saying that you should set the pass point at 70. I just wanted to give you a representation of what that looked like. Anyway, so you can see, like with the eligibility worker, the results we got like a bell curve. We got and we were able to basically distribute the candidates, over a nice wide range. And you're going to see this in each of these 4 slides I'm going to show you, that nobody scored in the very, very upper range. In this score, it was a 65 item test. 59 was the highest, and we only had 1 person who scored over 57. So what does that indicate? It indicates that we did not have a lot of cheating with this test. But this is a really nice distribution that we got, where we can able to just slice off the bottom portion of the candidate pool for the if moving forward. Okay, go to the next one. The next one is for administrative assistant, and we've got kind of similar results off this. You'll see not a lot of people scored above 71. I think we had 1 person score above 71 on an 80 item test. Our reliability, our alpha, was 0.74, which was really good. Basically, it did a fairly good job of distributing the candidates. Our mean on this one was 75%. That's why most of the candidates are in the green. However, depending on where you want to set it for your agency, you may want to set it at a different point. But anyway, go to the next one. Next one was clerk, entry-level clerk. And what you're going to find is, again, similar results. Not 65 item test, nobody scored above 60. We had a nice bell-shaped curve distribution. Our reliability is good. We had good statistics, and we had a nice distribution. We distributed the candidates pretty well. And the last one is child support specialist. The next slide. And you'll see what we had here. This was a little bit of a harder test, but it was a 60 item test. Nobody scored above 54. But we had the nice bell-shaped curve. And like for this one here, if you just wanted to take it at, only those at 70 pass, you still have 75 people that you can go on and, push on into the testing process. I don't know how many openings you're going to have for child support specialists. I'm gathering it's probably not going to be many over the course of the list. 75 might be a good number to go on. But like I said, you can see the distribution here. Really nicely done. There's no evidence really of cheating because there's very few people on any of these distributions at the very upper range. So we've been having some really, really, really good results using the Unproctored testing recently. And last slide is basically any questions. If you guys have any questions, we'll take questions now. If we have too many, there's some email addresses at the bottom. You can email us with questions or inquiries that you have, and we'll be glad to answer them.
And as we wait for maybe any questions to come in on the chat, if you'll notice on the tests that Brian presented, they were shorter overall. The research on unproctored testing does recommend shorter tests in general. So that's why, if in your standard test, maybe you're used to giving 100 item tests or something like that, a lot of the research recommend shorter tests from Unproctored. That allows you to also create, like Brian had mentioned, maybe additional forms, alternate forms of tests, so with less items. So you don't have to write as many items or expose too many of your items at one time by creating shorter tests. And we're also looking at, currently we don't have it now, but soon we will actually, so if you're interested, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to share the results with you. But soon we'll have results from a test that was administered in a proctored setting and now will be administered in an unproctored setting. And so we're going to be able to compare kind of the data on the test between the two environments, proctored, unproctored, and see how similar or dissimilar the results are. And so yeah, we'll be happy to share that once we do have it.
So this is Jim Higgins. We do have some questions for you. One is, are we going to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation?
I believe
yes,
that's going to be put on the PTC website, isn't it?
I think that's typically where it goes.
Yeah, we'll post it on the PTC website, PTCNC.
And if you wanted to, and if PTC, we'll provide the PTC, it'll be on the website. And if you're able to email it to the attendees, that's fine with us as well. However you would like to, distribute it. Yes, we provide them.
All right. So the second question for you is, how do you handle a candidate that challenges the accusation of cheating?
So a candidate, in this case, a candidate you're accusing of cheating, as I'm assuming, does that sound like what they're asking?
It does.
Okay. What I would do is I would not challenge them of cheating. I would not accuse them. I would do what Brian recommended. If you're going to do confirmatory testing, and say in a second go around, we use that first test, to kind of screen out some individuals. And if in your confirmatory test, say you do another multiple choice test, or just in your interview question, you ask them technical questions and they don't perform well. If they fail that confirmatory test, just say, thank you, you didn't score high enough on this round, and we're moving on. If you're actually, you have proof that you're trying to accuse them of cheating in the unproctored session, that's tough. You'd have to, I don't know how you do that. Again, it gets sticky there. If you're doing remote proctoring, then you might have evidence of cheating. But for the most part, I would not accuse them of it. I would screen them out in those additional processes of the selection process, and by assessing some overlapping constructs or content in your interview or work sample test, and from there, when they fail those steps, because if they cheated in the other ones, then just say, hey, you failed this portion of it, thank you, but you're not going to be hired.
Okay, thank you. Here is your next question. How are you dealing with entry-level positions where candidates may not have access to a computer, especially during the stay-at-home order?
We haven't found that yet. And as Clinton had shown earlier in the presentation, that most people, especially the younger people, they all have access to computers. And if they don't, they get access. They can, go to a friend's house, go to their mom's house, go to the library to gain access. I know libraries aren't open right now during, the pandemic, but no, we haven't seen that as an issue just yet. Or at least it hasn't been brought to our attention just yet. Pretty much everybody that we sent out the links, and we're seeing about close to 98, 99% of the people that we send the links to are actually logging on and taking the test.
Now, I will add to that is I would say to come up with that contingency plan, though, to make accommodations, just like you would say for written tests. I've done written testing where you need to print a large print book for someone who doesn't have, their site doesn't allow them to see the normal size print. So come up with a contingency plan, though. So if that is going to happen, where maybe if you can bring one person in to, take a test on a computer that you have at the office, if you can do that with, so we haven't seen that though. So, but you do need to think about that ahead of time. How will you handle that? If there is, it's likely to be very few individuals. And so if you can maybe bring them, say if someone says, hey, I don't have a friend, I don't have a family member, I can't get access to a computer, then yeah, come up with maybe you can have them come into an isolated location at your office on a computer or whatever you are able to do. Again, we do not recommend. We can create mobile tests But most of these tests, if you're going to allow candidates to use a mobile device, you need to create your test to be mobile optimized from the get-go. So most candidates have access to a smartphone, but however, in most cases, unless you're going to design the test specifically for a mobile device, we would not recommend having candidates take the test on a mobile device.
And also, you know, one part of this, we also said that, you know, contact the candidates beforehand to give them, you know, these are the parameters that you'll need. Basically, they can identify how to, you know, get on the internet. If they don't have it at that time, they don't have access, then they can bring it up to us at that time. So it's part of the reaching out at the initial logistics that we can identify those candidates.
Okay, so your next question is, was the webinar recorded? Will it be available on the PTCNC website? The answer to that is yes, it was recorded. Here's a question. Can you give us a sense, if you know, the percentage of public sector entities that are using personality tests?
Based on my experience, I've done some research on this in the past. It's been a number of years, but it's very few. You know, so not very many. I can't give you an exact percentage, but I would say just a ballpark, I would say less, for sure, less than 20%. Yeah, so it hasn't been, but public sector, but when you look at the industry, testing industry, the whole personality testing is probably the most used type of test in the world.
Right. And one of the reasons for that is because people's job analysis, they're not putting a lot of personality issues into the job analysis. Pretty much one of the only classifications you're going to find a lot of personality testing is law enforcement, because they screen out some of the wackos pretty much. So, but for all the other jurisdictions, other classifications, typically not. So I would put it probably more like 5%, you know, way down there. Very few people are using it.
Yeah, I think it's, and it does, personality testing, according to uniform guidelines, does require criterion-related validation or a transportability study. And so I know in the public sector, a lot of times people have difficulty getting the sample size required to do criterion validation, which I think is another factor.
All right, so your next question is, have you seen local public agencies using unproctored methods?
That was local, sorry, local what agencies?
Local public agencies.
Well,
yeah, the results Brian presented, yeah.
We're not familiar with, you know, we don't keep tabs on other agencies and what they're doing. Just the people who have contacted us are the only ones that we're really kind of focused on right now.
But the slides that Brian presented were all results from public agencies. So those were all either counties or cities, you know, that were, so local government agencies, those results. So we've personally interacted, I would say, with about, right now, it's still not as many, but in the last couple of weeks, I could say we've heard from over a dozen kind of public sector clients who are interested, and we're testing with a handful of them right now.
So kind of related to that, if unproctored tests shouldn't be used for ranking candidates, do you know how the agencies used the tests you discussed in your last slides in the hiring process? Was the unproctored test used, hold on, I have to expand my window here, used as a further screening tool?
Typically it is, and that's what we recommend, but how agencies use the, you know, results, that's entirely up to them. And, you know, I don't know that they've shared the, how they're using them, but we recommend using it pretty much as a pass-fail. Like I said, you can tell who, you know, if the upper scores, if people were benefited by cheating. So I would recommend don't go there. But
and I can say they did use it as a pass-fail. They did, yeah, Brian. So those clients that we shared, it was a pass-fail.
Let's see. So do you have any experience with testing the trades like mechanics, apprentice, electricians?
Okay. I am the psychometrician for the National Association of State Contractor Licensure Agencies. I recently put together the national exams for electricians and commercial contractors. I am currently working on a national job analysis for basically HVAC and soon after that plumbing. Yeah. Clinton and I, because when we worked for PSI, we did a lot of licensure exams, and contractors, a lot of the contractor stuff is very huge for licensure exams. So we have extensive experience.
Yeah, but yes, we have, as of yet, we haven't done Unproctored with any of those the trades positions yet. Is that what you were gonna?
Yeah, that's. I think that's what they're getting at is like, yeah. Would you have any experience in that? So it sounds like not yet.
Yeah, not yet. We do have a couple clients. We're actually developing some apprentice and for trades positions right now that are COVID-19 proctored, and now they're exploring the unproctored option, but we don't know which way they're going to go yet. But we're actually currently working right now on a couple kind of apprentice and kind of mechanical construction trades tests for 2 or 3 clients that may go unproctored, but we're not sure yet.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to probably skip through some of these because we have 2 minutes left. What systems or what platform are you using to conduct your unproctored exams?
Ooh, I'll let Clinton take that one.
Yeah, so we've worked with a few. We have a few providers that we've worked with. We've worked with Fastest Web, Middle, and Rocket Hire. And where we have platforms with them. So with all 3 of those, we've worked. And there's other providers out there, PSI, where I used to work. There's other online platforms that exist. They're all, say, very similar. They all have their drawbacks and their benefits. But we can, yeah, we'd happy if you have more, if they have more questions. It's probably hard to talk about all the specifics and the benefits and drawbacks of those systems, but essentially all of them kind of can get the job done. But we're happy to, I guess, talk more specifically about it. If people have questions, we could follow up later on specifics of each of those systems.
Okay, let's see. Here's a statement. Contra Costa currently uses them for ranking.
Okay, so they use it for, okay.
There's one, yeah.
Well, and here's one related to the other one. Do you have any unproctored, again, it's looking at test administration platforms that you can recommend? Who are your top select?
Or platforms?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess there's I don't know if I have like a top, the issue with, well, for example, I mean, not to sell ourselves, but we do a great job at it. But the issue, if you go with them directly, is there's usually additional implementation costs. So I'm not sure. It really depends on your situation, on what you're looking for. If you're looking for just a bare bones, where you're just going to do straight multiple choice with not a lot of images, I guess it depends on. It really does depend. It's context dependent. So I don't know if I can say this one's the best of the ones I've seen, because I've worked at a number of different testing companies. I've seen the proprietary ones. I've seen the ones that people sell to others to use, and they're all similar but different. Sorry, I couldn't give a more clear, a more ranked list for you.
Well, maybe PTC at some point we can put out maybe an issue paper where we kind of unofficially compare and contrast available systems. I know at the Department of Justice we're purchasing an online testing platform. And, so we went through the whole public sector, procurement process, which takes forever. Oops, I'm sorry, there is a lawnmower, but it's time to end anyway. It's the perils of working from home. But we're going to have to end the meeting at this point. And thank you all for attending. And we will be following up with a link to the video and with the presentation slides. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you.